When you experience affliction or difficulty, how do you respond? Typically, when we encounter a trial, we feel very weak and out of control, don't we? When you feel this way, do you respond in pride or in humility? In Psalm 22, David is under a severe affliction, and by God's grace, we see him respond in humility. The first 10 verses unpack David's experience for us. 1, he laments that God seems far off. My God, why have you forsaken me? 2, he remembers God's faithfulness to the nation of Israel in the past. And 3, he recalls God's faithfulness to him personally. Next, in verses 11 through 21, David cries out to God for deliverance. He's surrounded, he's being mocked, he's on the edge of death, and he's completely overpowered. Talk about weakness. So he petitions God. He says in verse 11, "Be not far from me, for trouble is near." And then look at verse 19. He says, "But you, O Lord, do not be far off. O you, my help, come quickly to my aid. Deliver my soul from the sword." And finally, he anticipates God's response in verses 22 through 31. He knows that he will be vindicated. He'll praise the Lord in the midst of the congregation. He will be satisfied at last. And he'll see the redemption that extends to all the nations. All families shall worship before the Lord. The New Testament makes it very clear to us that Jesus is the one to whom this psalm points. He hung on the cross and he cried, my God, why have you forsaken me?" He was mocked. It was said of him, "He trusts in the Lord. Let him deliver him." He was surrounded and overpowered at the cross. They even divided his garments and cast lots for his clothing. Verse 18. Matthew uses all these explicitly to describe Jesus' affliction on the cross. And the New Testament makes the vindication of Jesus clear from this psalm as well. The author to the book of Hebrews quotes verse 22 and applies it to Jesus, who's not ashamed in his exaltation. Now, how did Jesus endure the cross by faith? How did he hope in God during this severe test of affliction? We see in Psalm 22 that he humbly submitted himself to God's will. In verse 6, he said, "I am a worm." He confessed his utter dependence upon the Lord. He believed that his affliction was not despised by God, verse 24, and that he knew he was heard when he cried to God, even though God seemed distant. So how about you? How have you responded to trials lately? Difficulty and affliction, they're an opportunity for you to humble yourself just like Jesus did. Don't dig in your heels and pridefully fight against God's sovereign work in your life. Rather, like David, like Jesus, the greater than David, humbly submit today to God by faith.